In a remote galaxy, an atmosphere-adapted lander began its descent into the cloud layer of an isolated world. At that altitude, no one could notice the 3 bright yellow isosceles triangles emblazoned on its indigo shell, the official seal of the Grashard Sidereal Caucus. As such, the lander was appointed with every luxury afforded by the Grashardi homeworld. Decorated in varying shades of lavender with pewter trim, it was snug, cozy, and anything but functional. Aside from a team of exquisitely trained flight attendants, its sole passenger was a highly regarded government official. From his comfortable cabin chair, Ambassdor Ungent Draaf stared up at the lander's starboard view screen and wondered what he'd find on the other side of that swirling white mass of water, ice, and dust. It wouldn't be long now. Soon the ship would extend its landing gear, and his 6-week journey at sublight speed from the Terran interstellar transfer station would be over. 6 weeks! At that thought, every muscle tensed in Ungent's bulbous exoplated body. It was hard to believe any trip across the continuum could take so long. But the Interstellar Transport Authority had been explicit. So close to the Fremdel event horizon, no sane pilot would dare use the space-folding engines. That is, except the Ulfdrani, a curious species of sentient avians whose sanity had been called into question more than once. Nevertheless, sublight travel had progressed rapidly over Ungent's lifetime. Back when he was a boy, the fastest exotic particle ships could manage no more than 2% of the constant. Now, nearly a century later, ships were approaching 15% with no strain. In some ways, as Grashard's first ambassador to the Dralein, Ungent had been grateful for his long flight. The journey from Satron to Bledraun, the Dralein homeworld, had given him a chance to study this fascinating species in depth. Distracted by what he'd discovered, he took no interest in the rest of his descent to the planet. Instead, he turned back to his research and, once again, struggled to grasp the Dralein's central mystery. Throughout their long lives, he recalled, they periodically experienced a kind of mental molting known as the surround. During the surround, obsolete structures in the Dralein brain were shucked off and replaced with a more intricate array of neurons and synapses. Their higher cognitive functions on pause, the Dralein did little more than cower from the sun, forage for food, and, during this time only, produce offspring. Over time, these recurrent cycles of mental rebirth had led the Dralein to astounding leaps in culture, science, and technology. There was no other way to reconcile their advanced civilization with their relative isolation. Thoroughly obsessed by the thought of these strange beings, Ungent tried to distract himself by counting out his luggage one last time. But it was no use. Astonishing, he mumbled. The lander hit its assigned airstrip and taxied to a graceful stop. Soon Ungent would embark on a diplomatic mission unlike any in his long career. Not even the Terran Protectorate, with its splendid advanced design ships, had established an embassy here. True, the Protectorate had once attempted to subjugate the Dralein and establish a colonial government on Bledraun, until the humans decided the venture wasn't cost-effective. At that point, they pulled up stakes and left without even bothering to establish a trade agreement with the Dralein. Ironically, recent events had made trade with Bledraun imperative. A noise from outside the lander made Ungent glance up at the starboard viewer again, but it was nothing. The crew was busy dislodging a small ground animal that had crawled into the lander's luggage compartment for a snooze. Can't understand the human attitude, Ungent thought. Politics aside, he believed that studying a species as unusual as the Dralein was worth any price. Fortunately, Grashard was one of the few worlds not beholden to the Terran Protectorate for anything. That usually gave Ungent the freedom to put the humans' clumsy power-mongering out of his mind. Yet today, at the start of his new mission, the distinguished crustacean's nagging worry about the possibility of human intervention gave him no rest. Despite their supposed indifference to the Dralein, Ungent was sure the Protectorate would follow his progress closely. Once he'd paved the way on Bledraun, he feared, they'd decide to pounce. After all, it had been less than 2 cycles since the humans had muscled their way into a Grashardi trade agreement on Jalarg 3 involving medicinal herbs. As soon as the lander completed its status checks, Ungent was cleared to gather his spherical carry-on bags onto a small mobile maglev platform and trundle down the matte black exit ramp to solid ground. The rest of his baggage, as usual, was already being transferred to his official residence in the Grashard Embassy building. Before stepping out onto the polyslate tiles of the landing strip, Ungent attached the breather mask a flight attendant had handed him. Its soft polymer surface fit snugly but comfortably against the pale yellow gills on either side of his plump, purplish neck. While the atmosphere on Bledraun was similar to that of his homeworld, he'd need time to adapt to the slight traces of chlorine in the air. Gravity, in its own way, was also a bit of a problem. As he felt the crush of 1.15% Grashard normal for the first time, Ungent cursed the day that food had become his constant companion. There were many reasons for this, including the unexpected death of his daughter Flairant, but Ungent was determined not to let her memory prey on his emotions. In fact, it was for this very reason that he delayed retirement to accept one more diplomatic mission. His heart had told him that a radical change of scene was the one thing that would give him a fresh perspective on his grief. Flairant, he reminded himself often, had been an adult and old enough to make decisions on her own. She'd chosen to push her journalist's nose into the camps of the Kresovic militants. Her subsequent capture and the rest had been inevitable. Some days, this logical cause-and-effect analysis of the past gave him strength and comfort. Other days, he leaned heavily on the soothing effects of a 5-course meal to smother his grief. In any case, between his increasing girth and the gravity differential between Grashard and Bledraun, Ungent had been advised to purchase a walking stick to help him get around. He'd chosen a 1.75-meter titanium staff at a local crafts fair on his homeworld. It was etched with scenes from his favorite Grashardi folktales. As he looked around, Ungent marveled at the lush scenery, for the Dralein, unlike the vast majority of developed civilizations, had found a way, that is, bothered to find a way, to live in harmony with nature. Grashard did better than most in this respect. Still, nowhere outside of a few protected areas or the immense estates of the wealthy could anyone see such natural wonders. Yet here, even at the edge of the airfield, Ungent was distracted by blooming, pale, lavender chisdra flowers, row after row of tall blue-green Justhalna pines, and a rich variety of soft, pale orange grasses trimmed to perfection in fascinating geometric patterns. Lovely, he sighed to himself, and wished for the 1000th time he could have persuaded Nilgrint, his wife, to join him. Stuck in her ways, he told himself, though he knew the real reason had more to do with her complete lack of interest in the universe outside her cozy suburban enclave. A few meters up and to the right, Ungent saw a row of navy blue self-piloting air taxis. As he approached, a holographic banner appeared above the one on the far left, with the message, "Welcome Ambassdor Draaf," emblazoned in black letters against a mustard-yellow background. Because this was a gesture common to many worlds, Ungent wasn't foolish enough to think his arrival had triggered anything more in the hearts of the Dralein than courtesy. All the same, the holographic banner made his heart race. Within minutes, the Grashardi ambassador to the Citizens Collective of Bledraun arrived at the door of the newly constructed embassy. As he paused on its Drothalnian marble steps, he gazed up at its curious geometric design with a distinct feeling he had nothing to lose. Ungent's first encounter with a member of the Dralein did nothing to dispel his confident assessment of the situation. The furry being that greeted him at the door was the very image of sophisticated charm. Furry, Ungent knew, was an extremely childish description, but at first glance it was hard not to focus on the Dralein's thick, swirling pelt. At second glance he saw a being of undeniable intelligence and grace. "Greetings from Grashard, Defer Shodron Dadrin," said Ungent. "I look forward to a long and fruitful relationship between our worlds." The tall government official smiled down at Ungent. In his forest green uniform, edged in silver thread, Dadrin looked every bit as friendly as he was imposing. "Welcome, Ambassador," he said. "Here on Bledraun we value more what comes from the heart than from ritualized phrases. What would you really like to say?" Ungent looked up into Dadrin's calm brown eyes. The answer was simple. "When do we eat?"